date is the 10th of January 2015. I'm talking to Mike Szpakowski. Mike, I wonder if you could just tell us, first of all, can you just tell us a little bit about the structure of the labour, what the labour movement was like in Harlow before the strike at all? What can you remember about how things...
I mean, yes, the early 80s, you forget now just the fact that there was still a lively tradition of workers' struggle happening in the early 80s, and that although that was problematic in many respects, there was the argument that those of us in the SWP were familiar with whether there had been a downturn in workers' struggle, and indubitably there had. Nevertheless, there had been the steel strikes in 1980, the ASLEF strikes in 1982 that coincided with the Falklands War, most importantly, the return of mass picketing with the Warrington messenger dispute in '83, which I think was hugely exciting for a lot of us because we felt that it was, maybe perhaps we were on the edge of something, maybe some kind of change of mood, and there's clearly a lot of people were hoping that things were going to change. People were very depressed by the advent of Thatcher, very depressed by the kind of flag waving over the Falklands, and we were, I think, certainly I was young and keen as mustard, and there's a certain kind of ultra-leftism sometimes about being that age where everything is going to be the thing that breaks the logjam and leads on to the revolution, which of course will happen one day, but not perhaps as readily as or as soon as you think it is when you're 25, so that was the situation nationally. Situation locally, there was a small branch of the SWP which had suffered as a result of the internal arguments in the party around the downturn and around the Women's Voice organisation. Although it was extant, people sold the paper every week, there was a serious orientation on the working class, there were industrial sales happened, there was a weekly programme of speakers, and we were speaking to other people apart from ourselves. The difficulty was recruiting new blood to the party, maintaining people in a situation which was hard work and often quite exhausting. At the same time, you still had a situation where you had a significant presence of a Labour Party that, although it was weak and directionless and apolitical in many respects, still contained many people who had joined because they genuinely believed that it was going to change the world. And it had some kind of trade union implantation, it had a relationship with the trade unions in the town, you still had a CP, substantial CP influence in the town. It was a different place to the place that we see now, where the Labour Party has been almost entirely depoliticised, when it's not being horrendously right-wing. Look at Susie Stride, just a more apolitical creature one couldn't wish to meet, which of course means towing the line, means actually towing the anti-immigrant line, towing the business is good line by default. It was different then. It was different then. And there was a Labour left. It wasn't that long after the Wembley conference and the the very, very narrow defeat of the Bennites. In terms of the SWP, there'd been this decision, which I think was a correct decision, but one which had consequences, to tack leftwards in the early 80s, to concentrate on ideas, not at the expense of doing things, but to make sure that each member was armed with political arguments, a position which had a danger of sectarianism, which carried a danger of sectarianism, which was to prove, which did have an effect upon, I think, the way that certain members of the party saw the early days of the miners' strike. I think we corrected it very quickly, but I think it's undoubtedly true that it was there, and it arose out of a completely correct orientation, which meant that the party survived and wasn't subsumed into the kind of cheerleading for Ben and the subsequent kind of loss of heart that came with Ben's defeat.
Was there quite a strong Bennite left in the town
Yes,
at the time?
yes, and I think they were well represented in the support for the miners. But you know, the Bennite, it was an interesting creature. It was, you know, as is so often the case with reformist leftists, there were people who were capable. Right, these were often profoundly decent human beings. Please don't get me wrong; they were very, very decent human beings. They're people that I've stood alongside and proud to stand alongside. I think quite often their politics were very, very confused and very, very ropey in some cases, and they flipped from positions of, you know, verbal radicalism to, in practice, to extremely kind of accommodationist and sometimes, you know, kind of obstructive and bureaucratic politics, because they felt they had, you know, they had an organ in, for example, the Labour Party and its hegemony on the council, and at that point the Labour Party was hegemonic on in Harlow. I mean, I know that that Labour was no longer in control, no longer held the seat, but in terms of the town, you know, it felt, you know, a solidly Labour town. Again, very, very different from me, and therefore there was this feeling that the council and the institutions around it could be rolled out to support things, which was true, but there were consequences to that.
Right. Okay. And so, what did you think about, you know, when the strike actually began? You know,
I was in a state of utter excitement. I listened to every single news bulletin. No internet then. It was, you know, I took a radio with me to work. When it first started, I was still working. We were sacked and victimised. A small theatre company that was run by the council that I worked for in those days. We were sacked and victimised, but I believe I was still at work at the beginning of the miners' strike. I certainly remember listening to a report on the miners' strike in the office at the top of Kingsmore House that we used to, that I used to be the administrative centre of the organisation that I worked for. I just listened all the time. It was bliss. There was a sensation that all the politics that we'd been defending as revolutionaries, in a sense abstractly, for the last, you know, the last sort of 2 or 3 years that I'd been active in. I mean, I've always felt myself to be a lefty, but I've been actually active in organised left-wing politics, were manifest there. You could see the agency of the working class as the pickets went from pit to pit. You know, the mass walkout at Corton Wood. You know, it's everything in embryo that revolutionaries had argued that the working class is. You know, it was magnificent, and you saw people being interviewed. Occasionally, you saw comrades being interviewed and say, you know, now we're going to picket this picket, then we're going to picket every pit in Yorkshire, and then we're going to picket every pit out nationally. You know, and there was this incredible sense of confidence, I think, about some of the old militants who were brought to life by the initial strike wave. It wasn't until, you know, quite a lot later that really the problems that were there began to be apparent. Right. So I think at the beginning, the excitement that came with the strike fed into a certain strain of ultra-leftism, I think, amongst SWBP comrades in Harlow. But you have to realise that we were not, you know, we were much more significant than we had any right to be, you know, 4 or 5 people. But nevertheless, we were, you know, we were not significant compared to the kind of body of a left in Harlow. We punched above our weight. We felt that we'd been vindicated. I remember saying, you know, to somebody who remained nameless but was a Labour left, you see, you know, the working class, you know, can have agency, look at what's happening. We never said it couldn't. Of course, the week before they'd been saying the working class is dead, New Times, you know, all that old crap. Which, again, is a lesson in how reformism and reformists will shift ground very quickly under the pressure of circumstances. And I don't think, you know, again, because we hadn't really been faced with that kind of upheaval before that affected us directly, that, you know, there was lots of stuff we weren't prepared for. We were only prepared for very, you know, theoretically.
Okay. So how did the support group in the town, how did that originate then?
It was again. I want to say that we were the first people off the ground. Now, I'm saying that not for sectarian reasons, but it's true.
Mm-hmm.
We had a public meeting. We had that magnificent poster, which the party got out within about a week. Victory to the miners. Solidarity will win. Which, you know, absolutely superb. And we fly posted that all over town. We had a meeting, and we had 3 or 4 people we'd never met before, including a guy who became a very active comrade for a while, a guy called Dave Hay, who ended up being active in the international, you know, the US organisation that we had at the time as well. He came along for the very first time. A guy called Steve Brandon, who worked at Johnson Matthey, and his brother became active in the Labour movement shortly after that. Steve was active for a while. You know, people who were serious about wanting to build something, who understood what it meant to be active at work, who really wanted to do something. So there was a real charge about that. So for a while, and we sold the paper, it's difficult to remember so many years afterwards, and I didn't take notes at the time, how long it became. There were a number of things happened simultaneously. One, it became clear that the strike was to some extent stalling. Cliff had an article in Socialist Worker which you can look up where he said, the strike is like a car that stalls at every traffic light. It's the first acknowledgement of the fact, you know, the first bucket of cold water really, when we realised that it wasn't going to be onwards and upwards. I think that must have coincided with the fact that, you know, the mass scabbing in the Knots coalfield. So there was that. At the same time, there was a sectarian note being struck by our publications where it was the support committees had started, often, usually at the behest of the Labour lefts and the and trade union activists, and you know, collecting cans of beans, etc. I remember I think it was a Tim cartoon that said, "Use this for a can of beans." And it showed a can of beans being thrown at a picket's head, and we got forward at that.
Like a policeman's head.
A policeman's head, yeah. No, sorry, yes. But I remember there was then a kind of sharp argument in the party about the question of the support groups, and people like Cliff argued very hard that we were taking a sectarian attitude, that we would isolate ourselves. I think it was absolutely right, you know, because there was, especially when you were very weak on the ground as we were, there was a tendency just to sort of like stew in the righteousness of your own, you know, the fact that you felt your opinions about the world had been validated. That doesn't mean we didn't try to do stuff. We did try to. We collected. I think we bucket collected. But then we got hassle, and the local support group said we should get official permission to collect, which we argued against. We should just do it. We should have open buckets. We should collect. But they insisted that we got it licensed through the council. Of course, at that point, those people were able to deploy their contacts in the council, and we went through the whole thing. That people filled in, you know, the forms, and we had sealed collecting tins, and the accounts had to be kept. And then there was all the stuff about, oh well, we don't want people politicising this. This was coming from the Trades Council, people like, and the Labour left as well, saying we don't want this politicised. We're not going to have papers being. Nobody can sell a political paper and collect from the miners at the same time. And we were simply not strong. You know, there was no way we could have defied that. We would have. It would have been a sectarian thing that we would have ruled ourselves out of it. So what we did was we had. 2 or 3 of us would collect, and 1 of us would sell the paper, but we had to maintain a distance. Yeah, it was very, very, very powerful, the moral pressure that was exerted on us. The other thing I have to say, quite cynically, I think there were elements of the Labour Party who loved the Knots miners because they were a fluffy puppy that was being kicked. You know, they were. It wasn't like the confidence of the Yorkshire miners. I mean, they were great people, they were wonderful people, but they were a minority. And it was like, there was this rhetoric of, oh, we must take care of these people. It was this sense of doing it for, rather than we are building solidarity so that strike can win. It was the rhetoric of don't let, you know, of help the miners, support the miners, look after the miners, which is problematic. But it replaced the idea of victory to the miners. And that was an idea that was absolutely dominant amongst the Harlow, the milieu, the the largest group of the milieu that supported the miners within Harlow. It was, you know, we are helping these people out, and we don't want it to be political. Or if it was a bit, but of course that's nonsense. What it was political. The politics of it were the politics of the Labour left by default. I don't know how much the left around the militant were involved in the decision to prevent the sale of papers. They accepted the same discipline as us. I don't know whether they agreed with that or pushed it or whatever. I mean, again, because of the fact that they tended to have positions, so you had Danny Burton from the Militant, who was chair of the Trades Council, secretary of the Trades Council at that point, and he would chair the miners' support meetings. You know, these people were fought hard. They put loads of work in. They made a real difference. I think they cut more with the predominating ideas on the left, and that made it very difficult for us in Harlow as a tiny minority. I think the situation in the big cities, where there was a stronger revolutionary left, and they were often talking to miners who were from the more radical heartlands of, say, the South Yorkshire coalfield. You know, that made a big difference.
So, what did you see the role of the SWP within the support group then? What was the?
Well, I mean, I think we religiously attended the meetings. We were marginalised. I think we were completely marginal. We did the work that needed to be done. We took on the work. We, you know, turned up for any meetings. We turned up for any collections. We were involved in, you know, raising support for the miners, and we argued. I think it was very important that we were arguing the politics of the paper. We were arguing that, you know, this was a fight that had to be won. You know, that solidarity was crucial. I mean, I remember, you know, there were magnificent examples of solidarity. I remember the railway workers who stopped not at a picket but at a solitary placard that was you know, like embedded by the side of a track outside a coal depot in Leicester, and they stopped and refused to pass it. I mean, you know, when you think of how that was squandered by Willis and by Kinnock and by their dreadful betrayal, it makes you absolutely furious, because there was the energy, the will to win was certainly there. You think of all those people who stayed out till the bitter end, and you just think of the level of kind of grit and determination and solidarity amongst themselves that they needed to do that. And it's astonishing. It made it sometimes, because, you know, people did appreciate that, and people were really putting their backs into it. You know, people worked really hard. But there was a certain kind of moralism which excluded a frank political discussion. There was never any political discussion.
There was never
any political discussion at the minor support group. None whatsoever. It was always about, what are we going to do? So it was like this benefit or that benefit, or, you know, how are we going to get the stuff from here to be, or, you know, where are we putting miners up? There was never any political discussion about how the strike can be taken forward, the role of Kinnock, the role of the TUC. That was not discussed.
Do you think, were they trying to maintain a level of unity, do you think? Is that what they were trying to do within the group by doing that?
I mean, I'm reluctant to sort of impute motivations to people. As I say, you know, there was a general feeling that the orientation was upon getting a job done, and that job was collecting money.
Okay.
That became the central drive. Now, that was clearly, you know, absolutely central and totally important to do, but it was at the expense of any discussion about the politics of it. And I think the difficulty that the Labour lefts have also had, that they're in a party which was pulling in a different direction. You know, the worst of the Labour lefts in Harlow was infinitely better than Neil Kinnock. They wanted, of course they wanted, you know, I don't believe for a moment that any of the people wanted the party to do anything else but win. I don't believe it for a moment. No. You know, as I say, it wasn't the case that I think there was bad faith at work at all. But I think it was a consequence of rotten politics. I do. You know, that was, you saw it at local level. What you saw at local level was a reflection of what happened nationally. Was that people like Willis and the TUC and Kinnock exercised this appallingly kind of damaging, you know, all the agitation for a ballot, all the kind of umming and ahhing, all the condemnation of miners' violence, blah, 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 blah. It was incredibly sapping. And you saw it reflected, I think that might have been the explanation for the lack of politics locally, was that don't rock the boat. You know, the feeling that, I remember the sort of, near the beginning of the strike, there was this agreement, some kind of agreement between the NUM, the steelworkers and the dockers. They proclaimed the Triple Alliance. Again, you know, the rebirth of Triple Alliance, but it was a purely bureaucratic thing. It didn't actually have any consequences in terms of action on the ground. So it was like, don't rock the boat because, you know, you might destroy this unity. But of course the unity was actually, at national level, was a unity of the right and the people who were going to be betrayers of the strike. I don't think any of the people, say it again, I don't think any of the people involved in Harlow were turncoats. You know, leave that to Willis, Kinnock, Kim Howells, who played the most absolutely despicable role later on. You know, there were plenty of people who were actually willing to sell out at national level. I think what the apolitical nature of a lot of the stuff that happened in Harlow represented was a feeling of don't rock the boat, don't fall out, you know, unity. Unfortunately, under the circumstances, the unity that obtained was the unity of that left Kinnock and left Willis alone. That isn't to say that people wouldn't be scornful of Willis and Kinnock, you know, in private, but it wasn't a discussion. As far as I can remember, it was a discussion that happened in the miners' problems. Having said that, you know, I mean, it's transformative for a lot of people. There are a load of people involved. A load of people I've not seen before involved. I remember my mother-in-law putting miners up week after week after week. People were pulled into all sorts of activity. And in some ways, it's easier now to see with the benefit of hindsight just how wonderful a time it was in lots of ways. I mean, it was very difficult. Very difficult. I mean, it felt very difficult, very lonely to be a revolutionary in Harlow in that time. And I think that we did well to come out of it. I mean, I'm very proud. Somewhere I've got my mug that the Knots Miners gave me. You know, that acknowledgement that I was part, you know, that despite the fact that we, yeah, there's quite a lot of hostility towards it, especially from the militant in those days. So it's saying it's true. Sectarian hostility, you know, when we did try to pipe up at meetings, we were kind of mocked and, you know, put down, and we had to sort of, you know, smile and do our best to get stuff over. But having said that, you know, we were acknowledged, all of us, as people who were central contributors, and, you know, being thanked and getting the kind of memorial mug and people sending us cards and stuff like that. And it was very moving to get that, and they were great people.
Well, not people.
Yeah, they were great. You know, they were, you know, it was, you know, they were great because of the situation that they were in. You know, it just it showed you what the heights to which human beings are capable of rising in struggle. And there were all those things like, I mean, I think there were various kind of, you know, like kind of little affairs went on between kind of local people and miners and stuff like that, and things like that. That sort of, you know, there's all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And there were, you know, there's some great. I remember we, you know, because I worked in the theatre, we did several kind of benefits and stuff like that, and it was great to be part of those things, you know. And it was inspiring. It was inspiring, and it lacked. We lacked a strong and coherent enough revolutionary left in Harlow, and, you know, I suppose in a sense that was true. That was true nationally. You know, we didn't have the forces on the ground to actually shift things towards a strategy that could have won.
Okay. There seemed, like, in Harlow, like you say, there seemed a huge effort in Harlow, you know, to keep the strike going and to support the strike. I know there were things like door-to-door collections and town centre collections, workplace collections. So did it seem at the time that, you know, that the strike had, you know, huge support in Harlow, significant support within the town?
You get a lot of money. There was clearly it's very difficult to tell. You know, you would get a lot of money in the collections. There was clearly a substantial minority of people who felt very, very strongly about it. You also got, you know, the Go Back to Russia Brigade, which was still active at that time. You know, but it was, yes, it was a different atmosphere to the, and you know, sometimes that the way that it was conducted in Harlow fed into that thing of depoliticising the contacts with the people who came and gave money. Don't put off the people who are giving money. You know, don't you know? Oh, isn't it terrible what's being done to them? You know, whatever. That was the kind of discussion that was often had. You know what I mean? And there was, I remember somebody on the megaphone. You know, it was, again, it was more help. You know, it was appealing to people's sort of sense of solidarity and justice, but not in the sense of appealing to people in the sense of saying these are people who have the power to win and change our society. You know, that's why you should support them, because actually if they win, you win. It was much more, this is outrageous what's been done to it, which of course was true, but it's only half the story.
Okay.
So yes, there was you know, people put huge amounts of work. People gave their houses up, you know, gave space up to have money to stay. People spent lots and lots of time, you know, doing all sorts of things. I remember the first time I actually met Tony Sullivan properly was there was a minor support group at the old AU hall, and he turned up with a collection that he'd done at the college.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I'd you know, I didn't even know who he was at that point. I meant to recognise him because he's a fairly sort of recognisable chap, you know. But yeah, he came and brought his collection in. Yeah.
It's interesting because a number of the people you've mentioned who you came across for the first time then are still active, you know, today. You know, so it's had long-term impact on people.
Oh, I think it did. I think it did.
Okay, I think I want to come back to that actually towards the end. Okay, to what extent do you think was there workplace support for the strike? You know, was there a network of trade unionists organising solidarity in the town, raising collections and things?
Right.
Do you know?
I am pretty sure that people like Keith Hodgson ran regular collections at work. It was not the main focus.
Right.
And it was certainly something that we argued for. Where we could, I think, if I remember rightly, Steve Brandon ran a collection at Johnson Matthey. I think Dave Hay ran a collection at the DSS, which I think is where it was, or DHSS as it was then. We were regarded as quaintly eccentric in our emphasis upon the need to build a workplace network of contributors. I think Jan did collections at work as well. But it wasn't, as far as I remember, and you know, memory fails now. As I say, I was quite frustrated because it was, I mean, you know, it's a fairly odd workplace that I was in most of the 80s anyway, but I was actually not there for most of the miners' strike because we'd been sacked. But I don't think it was a central, it certainly wasn't something that came up as a kind of central discussion. If you said it was, oh yes, but it wasn't like, because we saw that as a way, I mean, actually we did see that as something that we could argue for, or we could deliver, that actually did make a difference. But of course, you were delivering much less in terms of people's 50p's or whatever, than you would on a Saturday morning. And that again was something that, oh well, look, you know, it was gauged in terms of the amount of money that was raised rather than the political importance of raising the money. Again, you know, we saw the question of workplace collection as central to building up a collection, building up a consciousness that at some point might be able to deliver concrete solidarity, whereas I think there was I think it's fair to say, political confusion, where people merely saw it as a question of getting the largest amount of money on the kind of almost charitable basis that I talked about before.
Okay.
This is not going to go down at all well. I think other participants in the event, well, they can say what they remember. This is my, you know, as far as I can, you know, I'm trying to be honest when I actually can't remember things, and I'm trying to be very clear about what I do remember.
Okay. So when the Notts miners came to the town, then what were they doing? What was their role? Was it part of? Were they going to like power stations and stuff around Essex to try and pick them out?
No. As far as I know, there was none of that. As far as I know, they were much. No, it was. I don't know how. Either the Trades Council or somebody around, people around the Labour left, made the link. And I think, and from the beginning, it was about raising money to keep people out. Because, you know, obviously it was much more difficult for the Notts miners. It was much more difficult. You know, there were people in their pit who were scabbing. You know, there were scabs in their own pit, so it wasn't. And again, I think the fact that you know, Harlow adopted the Notts miners hasn't, you know, tied into some of the politics of the people who were involved with that. In that, it was much more a question. You know, it was really a question of maintaining the strike with those people. You know, we had people who would, you know, one or two people who we collected with early on who went back to work. And you would say, where's so-and-so? He went back to work. And, you know, you could see how angry and disappointed and bitter people were. You know, but you know, it's obviously enormously difficult for the Notts miners. So that was very, very different from... I mean, I don't think that the Notts miners were different from the rest of them. You know, it wasn't the case. There certainly was a militant minority who wanted to do things like put out the power station, blah, 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 blah. But the strike got bogged down in a kind of, you know, maintaining the strike mode, actually within about, what, 4 or 5 months? You'd have to look at the history of a strike to see, you know, I can't remember the dates there. But actually, relatively quickly, it then became a war of attrition. And there were points like the dock strike, the NACODS dispute, which we now know. I mean, only this week, the papers are coming out saying that, you know, there was real worry amongst the Tories. And we've seen that before when, you know, 30-year, you know, other not 30-year papers, but other information has come out to show how frightened they were and how, you know, that these things would make a difference. Yeah, I think if NACODS had have come out, I think it probably would have won the strike.
Yeah, well, definitely, yeah. Okay. Did support for the strike in Harlow change as, you know, under the impact of national events?
I think that towards the end there were people who became people not central people, not people who were central to it. You know, there was no doubt there was huge commitment, and I don't want to, you know, in any of the criticisms that I make of people, they're not to do with people as people or their willingness to fight or to work. That was you know, that was taken in all the cases. People were, you know, really put themselves out, really worked hard. I mean, the criticism that I think one would make were political, certainly in terms of the people who were central to the minor support committee. No, I don't think there was. You got people who were on the edges who'd been quite supportive, who were cast into enormous gloom. I remember one guy who'd, you know, given money you know, every week, came up and he shouted at us. He said, "There's nothing to fight for. You know, they've been beat. You know, it's just terrible." And there was no arguing with him. You know, he was just sort of utterly despairing.
Okay.
It was very hard. I mean, it was very, very hard. And it was very hard. I was thinking about this before you came around when I knew that you were going to do this, and I was thinking about. There was a really, really brave and necessary and good article by Duncan Harlow in this paper shortly after the strike went down. And he said, you know, if we're comparing the period that we're in now, it is much more like the period post-26 than anything else. You know, that we have to face up to that. There was, you know, massive rebuilding going to be necessary. And I thought it was a very unpopular thing to say, but it was the truth that it was a catastrophic defeat. doesn't mean, of course, that the fight wasn't worth having. As you say, it had enormous consequences in terms of radicalising. People are active to this day. But it was a huge defeat, and it was important to recognise what that did, both in terms of sort of balance of class forces, but also what it did to our side, and especially to the trade union bureaucracy of the Labour Party.
So what was it like at the end of the strike then? How did people locally, you know, receive that? And what about like the branch, the SWP branch and stuff? Did it have any effect?
I can't remember now the exact number of people we had at the end of the strike. I know the strike did open out a period which went on through 85 and 86 when we were talking to people beyond ourselves, and that went on through into the Wapping dispute. We had people around us who were new, who were interested, who were politicised. So I guess we must have done something right, you know, in terms of, I think the dual track thing of being consistent about the collections and being involved and smiling even when people were horrible to us, at the same time as having a very intense political conversation with people about what was going on, you know, explaining what was happening, explaining what needed to be done, what wasn't being done, so that actually the people who were close to us were prepared and armed for what was happening. That isn't to say that, you know, when I sat and watched them march back to work and I could have cried. I didn't, actually, but I could have. It was very, very painful.
Okay. What about the long-term impact locally then of the strike and, you know, and the defeat of the strike? Did it have a local impact long term?
I think that it set the format for the way that future larger scale struggles would be supported in Harlow, which became increasingly problematic because it was almost as if every large scale struggle, immediately there's the assumption that what you were doing was a kind of sustaining maintenance role, and that political conversation around it was almost disloyal. And especially with things like the Labour left and unemployment centres, the unemployment centre played a role in that. So Dave Barham at the unemployment centre became the person who was sort of like the de facto chair of any strike support committee after that. And it was stultifying, you know. It was very, very difficult to have any sort of political discussion about things. You were there to service the strike, essentially, and not to kind of, you know, discuss with people the way that it should go forward. So I think it certainly made for a stronger sense of, you know, kind of bureaucratism around these things. Better that there were support committees, of course, you know. But I mean, the nature of them, I think, was you kind of felt that in a way, if you know, there was something magnificent about the miners' strike, even when things went wrong. As I say, it was magnificent, but there was a lot more sort of scrapping over a lot more political scrapping, I think, in the future, and a lot more kind of sectarianism around support for strikes. So I think that, you know, I think the consequences of the defeat were manifold. I think it strengthened things like the idea of municipal socialism for a while. You know, things like the unemployment centre. You know, you would get that. Well, this is what we're doing. You know what I mean? There was the argument that, you know, Labour in power in the councils, you know, were able to make a real difference, and I think that was probably strengthened by the defeat of an industrial challenge to the government. At the same time as it was clearly pushing the trade union bureaucracy rightwards at a rate of knots.
Did it make it harder to organise locally, in terms of workplace organisation, you know, and trying to encourage struggle and things like that?
I think after the miners' strike, we were very occasionally disputes would blow up in Harlow, which we intervened in, and we were the only people doing so. I remember the very first strike against the no-strike agreement happened in Harlow, and we were the only people to intervene around that. But these people were often very isolated, it was very, very apolitical. They were, in general, pleased to see us in terms of the fact that we brought support, but, you know, would keep us at arm's length politically. Although we did everything that happened, we were there. We got strikers along to come and address SWP meetings. We did our best to have collections and to do taking strikers out of the workplaces. We were terrifically weak, and I must say that, you know, personally, you know, I think for a lot of us, me and Keith, who I think were kind of like key figures in the branch for a very long time, it took a personal toll in that you constantly felt that you were not as good as the people in big cities, you know, and I think that's maybe, you know, we were the most energetic and most committed people, you know, we were there, but you constantly felt that you were not doing enough, because, and I think, you know, in a way it's quite good to feel that way because it makes you work harder, but I think also sometimes you've got to acknowledge the circumstances in which you're operating are not as favourable, and operating in Harlow was not as favourable as it would have been, say, operating in a big city where there are a lot more revolutionaries and a lot more kind of non-aligned leftists who are open to our arguments. It was very, very different in Harlow. So there were strikes, we were involved in them. Were we leading them or making them happen? Of course not.
Okay. I just want to ask a couple of
questions. When did you come on the scene politically in Harlow?
Well, I joined. I was one of the people who joined at the end of the strike as a result of the strike. Really.
And when did we first see you at Harlow?
That was when did I leave Middlesbrough? That was 2006, and then I went back 2000. So about 1987.
1987. Yeah. So I mean, you'll be familiar with the sort of. I mean, was the dock strike in '88? Was it?
Yeah, I think I can't remember.
Yeah. And you know, actually, we did. You know, I think one of the great things, and the things that I feel proud of having been involved in, is that we kept the flame burning. And not only did we keep the flame burning, because you couldn't have simply kept the flame burning of a revolutionary alternative in isolation. You did actually have to focus on the idea of doing stuff. Now, sometimes that stuff didn't pay off, or it was going through the motions. But it mattered. It mattered that you were trying to do it. It mattered that you were setting an example. It mattered that you were talking politics. It mattered that you were saying what needed to be done, even if it was impossible to do it. And even if you're in a tiny minority, the fact that that focus was there meant that it was something that was alive. And I think that's why the branch, you know, did exist. It was sustained over such a long period of time. And I think that you know, that has mattered. That, you know, in some towns branches collapsed and went, and I think it was important that happened. And I feel proud of that, and you know, and I think that it is important that revolutions are not simply, you know, revolutions are not propagandists. They're people who unite action and theory in a kind of dynamic way, and sometimes that action is not necessarily going to be the kind of action that you want to be, but the fact that you're actually, you know, engaged in it, I think makes a difference.
Okay. All right. Do you think the strike could have been won?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. A number of things. I mean, you know, there are a number of things that. Just purely chance things, I think, that made a difference. Like well, not chance things, because nothing is chance, but there were things that were finely balanced. Things like the dock strike, things like the NACOD strike might have made a difference. I think if there had been a significant breakthrough at a particular set of picketing, like Orgreave or something like that. If the day after Orgreave, if they'd have kept the mass pickets up at Orgreave, I think it would have made all the difference, you know. And I think it might, you know, there were some very, very good people involved in you know, obviously in the NUM. I think, you know, a few people having an influence at a particular place might have made all the difference in the world. There was everything to fight for all the time, you know. And I think that a lot of it was down to chance. Having said that, I think you were fighting in a situation where, you know, things had changed. You know, you were fighting against the Labour leadership and the TUC leadership that's actively doing its best to sabotage working class struggle. So there's that. There's also the, you know, other subjective things. You know, maybe if there'd been a bigger SWP, it would have been able to make a difference. I don't think we can beat ourselves up about that. My experience with the SWP is that the self-sacrifice of the members is astonishing in terms of trying to build the organisation. But I think yes, it was winnable. It was clear that it was winnable. You saw the way that the strike moved at the beginning. Had that momentum been kept up, then it could have been won in days, I think.
Okay. I mean, for a lot of people, it kind of demonstrated a lot about the relationship between capitalism and the state, and what Marx had said about the nature of capitalism. Do you think that's what did it say for you?
Well, certainly every resource of the state was unleashed in order to try and defeat the miners. The use of policing, and all these kind of of course they break their own fucking rules, don't they, whenever they want to. So, the behaviour of the police was absolutely abysmal. In a way, what would you expect? At the same time, what you did get from a lot of people, you got it from some of the kind of people around the Workers' Revolutionary Party and other people, was this argument there was some kind of police state going on. No, I think that the reason that the police got away with as much as they did was because there was uncertainty within the strategies that were employed by the miners, and particularly by the miners' union, and then spreading outwards like that by the TUC. They could not have beaten Solidarity. It wasn't that the police would be any more vicious in 1984-85 than they would have been in 1972-1974. It was simply the fact that there was a much more confident working class in 72-74. Things like Saltley, you had that entire kind of Birmingham engineering workforce mobilised. I believe it was the engineering workforce mobilised to support the miners at Saltley Gates. One of the things that we argued after Orgreave, and this could have made a difference, was to take the walking wounded from the Battle of Orgreave around the steelworks in Sheffield, to try and build up actual concrete support. The combination of that and a decision to orientate still on Orgreave rather than to send the pickets off into Nottingham, could have been a decisive turning point early on in the strike.
Okay.
Yeah, but so maybe to some people it was an education to see the police running rampage, and it was shocking. I mean, I grew up in South Yorkshire, and I can't say that my time was spent in my youth. My time was spent in the leafy West End of Sheffield rather than the pit villages of Doncaster or Barnsley. But I am familiar with them. I've been to these places, and actually to see hordes of riot police rampaging through an area of Doncaster was a shocking thing to see. Of course it was, yeah. I suppose intellectually, if you've been won to the idea of revolutionary socialism, one of the things that you're won to and that you've kind of studied is the way that the state is not neutral. The state is, will weigh in on